This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening, everyone. We'd like to now begin the public hearing.
You can hear me?
Good evening. My name is Stacy Yarborough. I am the North Haven Town Clerk and Tax Collector. As you all know, we're present this evening for the town budget hearing for the 2021 grand list, which is brought pursuant to Section 705 of the Town Charter and Connecticut General Statute Section 7-344. Before we get into the meat of the meeting, I'll give you a brief little history of a budget. Around November, December of each year, budgets are being made for each department. Each department head then presents their budget to the Board of Finance. There is then a preliminary budget created by the Board of Finance, and they start to get an idea as to what the grand levy will be, along with the grand list, and what the mill rate determination may be. Then there's the public hearing, which is, of course, tonight, which is a presentation of both budgets, the town budget, and the Board of Education budget. Tonight is for presentation and public hearing only. Keep in mind there will be no voting tonight. Then coming in next month, May 9th, we have the actual town budget meeting, and that's where voting will take place, but only on procedural aspects of the fiscal budget, not the actual amounts. That's referred to a referenda, and that takes place this year on May 17th. And as you know, the polls are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. For referenda, only the one poll located at Milford Wakely Recreation Center on Lindsley Street. Finally, if you would care to ask questions and or make comments tonight, please come forward. We have the microphone up front. Please state your name and your address. And also, please keep it friendly and keep in mind that everyone should get at least one chance to speak before another person gets to speak for a second, third, fourth time. Lastly, we'd ask that you hold back all of your questions, comments, etc. until after the presentation of both budgets. Now we will have Mr. Frieda, our first selectman, come up first, and he's going to present the town government budget, and that's followed by our superintendent of schools, Mr. Patrick Sturch, who will then present the Board of Education budget. If you ever have any questions about the procedures or any questions about the budget itself, you could always contact one of us from the town government after tonight's hearing or speak tonight. At this time, I'd like to introduce our first selectman, Mr. Michael Frieda.
Thank you very much, Stacy, and I'd like to apologize in advance. I'm a little bit under the weather tonight. On a personal note, I go to a lot of wakes in town, and I went to quite a few this week, and I just not quite feeling myself. So if the voice doesn't project, I apologize in advance. So I'd like to take you through this Town of North Haven 2023 fiscal year proposed budget. I'd like to start by saying that this proposed budget has a no mill rate increase this year. And I'll take you through some of the components of this year's budget. The budget, despite the fact you'll see a 3.7% increase overall in spending, will not have a mill rate increase this year due to a few different factors. One is an increase in state funding, something I've been directly involved with the governor's office and through my affiliations with CCM and the Council of Small Towns. New federal stimulus dollars that are not only be given to North Haven, but every city and town in the United States is receiving significant federal stimulus dollars, what's referred to as ARPA funds. And grand list growth, which is a combination of believe it or not, car values skyrocketing all over the state of Connecticut. Economic development, Amazon, the tax phase-in continues to phase up towards the full real estate value, and also through the settlement of a lawsuit that I was involved with when I took office regarding CMB. When I took office, there was a lawsuit against the town. We've turned that lawsuit into a development that will include 149 55 and over community units, of which about 67 are built, so we receive some top-line revenue growth on these new homes that are being built for a 55 and over community. Plus, there's about 200 more cars in North Haven than there were the year before. So these three factors, federal stimulus, an increase in state funding, and top-line revenue growth for the town. The total budget, and Patrick Stirk, our superintendent, will be following me momentarily. We see on the town side a dollar change of just over $3 million, or a 5.9% increase. Now, we have reduced capital. I'm going to take you through why there's a reduction in capital. We went from $972,000 in this current fiscal year to $371,950. So on paper, within the budget, it shows a 61.7% decrease, or $600,200. Contingency will remain the same at $300,000. You'll hear from our superintendent a 2.9% increase on the Board of Ed, about $1,695,000. And the total budget has a 3.7% increase, or a total spending of $4,169,803. When we look at the composition of the budget, 48% is on the town side, and 52% is on the Board of Education side. Let's take a moment to take a look at some of the incremental expenses that are part of this budget. Well, we've just talked about, and you'll hear from our superintendent on the Board of Ed, this budget also features the addition of 3 additional police officers, and that's being done, ladies and gentlemen, because of a rising crime all across the country, all across Connecticut, and of course no different here in North Haven. Our police department does a remarkable job, as our fire department does, but public safety is of utmost importance to me, and we can't have people nervous or afraid in their neighborhoods that their cars are going to be broken into. So I'm a pro-police and fire person. As many of you know, I've been appointed by 2 different governors to sit on Police Officer Standard Training Council, so I'm huge in law enforcement. So we're adding 3 officers this year. We're adding 2 additional firefighters, and we have a town health insurance increase of approximately, at this point, $203,000. Our debt has gone up to the level of an incremental $656,000, and I'll take you through that in a moment. We're asking for and positioning new positions in this budget, and I'm going to explain that, but here are some of them. A new sanitation collector, an additional one, and this is part of the incremental expenses. And our tipping fees, I've talked about this many times in the past, our tipping fees are rising. We're settling in right now at a certain amount per ton, but we're locked in at that, but it's going to be an extra expense versus last year. Now, tipping fees, ladies and gentlemen, for those watching on North Haven TV also, tipping fees are what we pay to deposit our municipal waste at the South Cherry Street facility in Wallingford, Connecticut. And the price per ton has gone up dramatically for several reasons, one of which includes the fact that there's plants closing all over Connecticut and all over the country. So the importance of depositing waste is very important, but because the demand is so high to deposit waste and the supply of transfer stations and burn stations has shrunken, this is why the cost is going up. We're positioning an additional engineer in our engineering department. We're positioning a new laborer in streets and roads. So the approximate number of incremental expenses on what I just illustrated is about $2.7 million. Let's go back and take a look at the debt. If we include the Board of Ed debt that the town handles, and we've always handled it, so the Board of Ed has 67% of the budget and the town 33%. Now, when we look at the debt, 67% of the current year's debt in this year's budget is to support paying off the high school. What people sometimes don't understand or don't realize is that when you see a new building up, that's when the payments start, when it's completed. And then it's 17 to 20 years later that it's the payment of those bonds are finalized. So we're paying off the high school. We have the middle school. And, of course, the North Haven Police Department, we're paying debt on that also. The good news with this is I'm setting the stage for a few fiscal years down the road where the debt will drop significantly here in town because we're paying the debt obligations. We're still AAA rated, so we're borrowing at the lowest interest rates. So a few fiscal years from now, we will drop the debt significantly, which will be a major plus in that fiscal year's budget when the debt drops that significantly. So let's take a look at the capital requests in this budget. In the library, some furniture upgrades, door access control system, and installation on that, total of about $11,750. In the Community Services and Recreation Department, we're looking to update the chairs. Some of them are in very dilapidated condition. So 100 chairs, painting, pool maintenance and repairs, which we have every year. So the subtotal of that is $54,200. In Public Works, a building department vehicle, a John Deere tractor, a Ford vehicle with a dump body plow, and of course we're paying this jet vac lease. And that jet vac is very important to pump out catch basins and clogged pipes during the course of any given year. So Public Works, $306,000. So this is the number I showed earlier, $371,950, which is less, about $600,000 than we currently have. However, through the utilization of the federal funding, I have been playing three roles here in our government now, not only as the first selectman, but also the economic development director and now the director of finance with the sad passing of Ed Swinkowski. So I've been spending a lot of time with our consultant for ARPA money, and I'd like to commend our fire chief who has helped me with this also, and he has been with me on many of these conference calls. But we've gotten cleared through the federal government the utilization of ARPA funds to fund these capital items that would have normally been requests in this budget. And these are very important capital items that we've spent a lot of time on getting them cleared through the consultant, through the federal government, and through the 3rd Congressional Congresswoman District's office, whom I work very closely with. So there's $1,098,590 that is not part of the budget book you see, but these are items that will be funded from those federal dollars. And they include a library chiller replacement. Our library director really has come forward and says we really need to do this. So Susan, I appreciate your input on that. Significant IT upgrades as we continue to evolve to manage and defend ourselves against cybersecurity problems. 3 new police cruisers. And in those cruisers, 3 PD laptop replacements, 7 police body armor sets, 3 police emergency light bar and siren packages, and 2 senior citizen buses through the federal funds. That's very important, ladies and gentlemen, for our seniors, for those that rely on our transportation system to take them to medical appointments and to take them to do grocery shopping. A fire department administration vehicle that's got well over 100,000 miles on it right now, and it's an old model. A fire rescue ambulance, fire extrication equipment, and a fire engine lease payment that would have been in this budget that's part of a multiple-year plan to purchase that vehicle or to lease that vehicle. So once again, $1,098,590 is our capital upgrades that benefit our citizens, that's utilized by the federal funds that we've received. So you might be asking, why are we proposing new positions? Well, if we look at the finance department as an example, in 2007, we had 10 positions in finance. Now we have 5, with yours truly as the director of finance. Of course, we had the sad passing of our colleague and our friend, our director of finance, Ed Swinkowski. We've never replaced the youth services administrator in community services. Our full-time senior citizens center director, Judy Amarone, is going to part-time per her request. We are adding 3 new police officers, as I mentioned, to enhance public safety. We're adding 2 new firefighters to enhance response time. And I think that we've seen the addition of our firefighters have enhanced the response time. And we've been down 1 engineer in our engineering department since 2009. So Andy Bevilacqua, our outstanding engineer, he and I work very closely together. But just so you know what the importance of an engineer is to a municipal government, we, and many people watching will understand this, we have significant drainage and flooding problems all over town, more so than we ever had. The remedy and solution to solve those problems, and some of them are unsolvable because some of the homes now are in federal flood zones, it all goes through the engineering office. So Andy and I spent a lot of time on this. He's kind of a one-man person now. Lynn Sadowski is also very helpful on this. But when we have projects to be done, and I'll give you an example, we have to put a pipe into a street off of Hartford Turnpike before we pave this road. That pipe will probably cost the town $150,000. But we can't do that without our engineers working with not only our Public Works Department, but also the Army Corps of Engineers, in many cases DOT, and in this particular case, the DEEP, because the regulatory agencies have to have a voice in what happens. So that creates a lot of bureaucracy and work for our engineers. That's why we're asking for another engineer to free Andy up so that the engineer 2 position can do a lot of the administrative work to help us and help Andy and help me and help our residents fast track some of these projects. Because when you're out in the streets like I've been with residents crying in tears that don't want to go to bed at night because they're afraid when it rains that houses are going to get flooded, that's an awfully profound experience. And believe me, I've been out there in the streets with the residents and I see the anxiety very clearly. This budget, once again, despite the 3.7% increase in spending, once again will have no mill rate increase. And I just want to summarize. An increase in state funding, new federal stimulus dollars given to North Haven and every city and town in the United States, and the top-line revenue growth. And I want to share with you that on bullet number 2 here, I am grateful to get the dollars we get from the federal government. But I want you to know that we don't get nearly as much as many of the other municipalities because we're AAA rated and because we're so well run financially. So we get penalized for that. As an example, we have one municipality who has 7 times the population as we do. They're getting 25 times the dollars that we're getting on federal stimulus. We could do a lot if we got that same proportion and amount, but we're not. So I'm grateful for what we're getting. The current mill rate is 30.71. The proposed mill rate is 30.71. And again, no mill rate increase this coming fiscal year. Here's a 5-year look back on the mill rate. As you can see, in 2017, it was 31.18. And we see the decline and the stabilization at 30.71. That's a 0.47 mill rate decrease in the 5 years. Now, I'm going to be even more perfectly candid with you on this. This is a thorn in my side, believe it or not, because the rating agencies are putting a lot of pressure on me because we're not raising taxes. And here's what the rating agencies say about North Haven. We are AAA rated once again. We're one of 30 to 35 municipalities across the state who have that designation. The significance of it is that we borrow at the lowest rates. And as interest rates are going to continue to rise, maintaining a AAA rated status is critically important to get the lowest rates. So we have a couple of red flags. They love the fact that, as they put it, strong leadership and management. They love the fact that there's top-line revenue growth in most years. They don't like the fact, well, I should say, on the first two I mentioned, we score higher in our peer group of 30 to 35 municipalities. But we score lower on two other factors. Our fund balance, they want it up to 10, 12, and eventually 14%, and we're at 8.23% now. They want to see that in their AAA-rated municipalities because they know that they can count on that revenue. Now, I've chosen not to do that this year because I recognize the inflationary environment we're in. Gas going up, cost of food going up. So with the rating agencies as to why we're not raising taxes. And part of my narrative will be, in this environment, I don't think it's the right thing to raise the mill rate because of the factors that I've mentioned. People are struggling, coming out of COVID, inflation, gas prices, and that's why we're holding the mill rate this year. To recap this proposed budget, it supports education. People are moving into town for several reasons. Education, services, new businesses coming in, and an addition of services to our service model. We have, ladies and gentlemen, bidding contests in the streets of North Haven when houses go up for sale. One house on Shawmut Avenue listed for $3,000. Wealth, you want your home values to rise because it's on paper, it's part of your family wealth. Now, the downside, of course, is that even if you keep the mill rate the same, sometimes the properties are taxed on the higher value, particularly in a reval year. So this budget supports education, and that's one of the main reasons why people want to move into town from other cities and towns. It enhances our current public safety by adding the police officers I mentioned and the 2 new firefighters. It adds positions in engineering, as I mentioned, to fast-track solving the proliferation of drainage issues that we see all over the town. We're asking for and positioning a sanitation driver because we've had delays in many parts of town. We're down a driver. And what that means is that there are routes sometimes that there's 2, 3, 4-hour delays. This budget maintains all existing services. In fact, it adds and enhances services to the town of North Haven. So what else does this budget allow us to do in terms of services to our residents? Well, we're still going to be paving roads in late summer, early fall. As I mentioned, it works to correct the drainage problems throughout the town. It allows us to correct the flooding problems, as I've mentioned now for the 3rd time. And before I move to this slide, I want to tell you that through the utilization of the federal funds that we have, I'm a man on a mission. I'm a man on a mission in many areas. But one of them is to improve our parks. So you're going to see new playscapes. You're going to see enhancements. You're going to see enhancements at Sinaway Field through the utilization of federal stimulus dollars. You'll eventually see a new playscape at Grover Wyman. And I'm working with the committee that built that back in 1995. You will see we put 2 new pickle courts this year in at Canna Park, and it's one of the most popular sports for people. We're going to be adding pickleball courts. and that will be done through the utilization of federal dollars. So I'm using the federal dollars because if we don't use it, we have to give them back. So I'm using the federal dollars to help the citizens, controlling the mill rate, and some of the revenue will be from the federal dollars to keep this mill rate where I presented it this evening. And then I'm going to be enhancing a lot of amenities for our residents. And many young families with children who go to these parks have told me that they like the initiative. We're going to be looking to enhance sports fields. We're going to renovate the North Haven track. That'll be done, the North Haven track, through the utilization of federal funds also. So I believe, and I hope you would agree, that we can never allow our town's infrastructure to enhance its amenities and create it to be an admirable destination for families and people that want to move into our town. We're on that track, ladies and gentlemen. The real estate agents throughout the region tell me that North Haven is, in their words, hot right now, quote unquote. And I'm trying to ensure that we continue to do everything we can to make sure that the town continues to thrive. And I anticipate next fiscal year growth. These are some of the projects that I'm personally involved with. New businesses that are in the pipeline that have not yet manifested themselves totally into our current budget, and these are some incremental factors. These are new businesses coming in. Amazon will continue to expand, and these are some of the other businesses that we're looking at and areas of town that I can guarantee you, this isn't speculation, this is fact, because I'm involved with every single one of these projects. To recap the next sequence of events, on Wednesday, April 20th at 6:30, we'll have our Board of Finance meeting. And at that meeting, sometimes changes are made. The annual budget town meeting is Monday, May 9th at 7 p.m. here at the North Haven High School. And on Tuesday, May 17th, will be the referendum at the Mildred Wakely Recreation Center. That's it, folks. Thank you for your attention. And that's the presentation on this year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frieda. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Patrick Stirk, our Superintendent of Schools, for the Board of Education budget.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. Just give me 1 second to get the presentation uploaded. So this is actually our new projector at the high school.
it's wireless, so we're still growing with it.
See that? Click on that. Yeah, he did that.
That's where it's stalling out on me.
You're ready to share. There you go.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Good evening, North Haven community members. Tonight I will be presenting the Board of Education's budget recommendation for the 2022-2023 school year. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Board of Education for their support of this year's budget, as well as thank Melinda McKenna, our Assistant Superintendent, all directors, principals, content area coordinators, central office staff, and student services personnel who were involved in the process of preparing this year's Board of Education budget. A very special thank you to our Director of Finance and Operations and Human Resources, and apparently IT, Howard Warlow, who has streamlined the preparation process and made adjustments within this budget to allow for increased transparency and increased everyone's overall understanding of this year's recommendation. So there's little change to the overall budget at all levels and within all departments. The far majority of increases are a result of contractual obligations and the cost of benefits. Within this year's budget, there is a proposal to add 3 full-time positions. I will elaborate further on those positions as well as the highlighted areas that have significantly increased or decreased and the reasons for these changes throughout the presentation. In addition, there is a proposal to include 2 new athletic teams, a high school girls rugby team and a high school wrestling team. The district's directors and building principals responsibly created their budgets for the 22-23 school year. Howard and I spent time with each of them to review, revise, and reduce where possible while still ensure we are meeting all obligations and staying true to the district's mission. The budgeting process is one of the most important tasks the district and the Board of Education take on to reach the objectives within the district's mission statement. The NHPS mission statement is as follows. It is the mission of the North Haven Public Schools in collaboration with students, parents, and community to develop responsible, educated, and productive global citizens who can thrive in an ever-changing world. The Board of Education approved the vision of the graduate at December's Board of Education meeting. The VOG reflects the skills and dispositions expected of our students and will be the foundation of all work within the district. It also is an important component in the budget planning process. It provides direction, priorities, and frames how the district will utilize the allocated funds. And just a big thank you to North Haven High School senior Jason Pham for creating this tremendous graphic. So as we focus on the budgeting process, my responsibility is to collaborate with district leaders to design a fiscally responsible budget that ensures the following: equitable and developmentally appropriate educational experiences between schools, a safe, clean, and learning environment, fulfillment of statutory obligations, and continue to advance the Board of Education goals. As part of that responsibility, we are incredibly sensitive to both the broad educational needs of our students and the resources we are expending to address those needs. In creating this budget recommendation, we were committed to maintaining these priorities. Maintain the district focus on improving achievement for all students. Adjust instructional needs associated with the recovery from COVID-19. Meet all contractual obligations. Ensure designated services are provided through ESSER funding are absorbed by the general operating budget, and address the social and emotional needs of all learners by beginning to increase the level of support services within our schools and district programs. The proposed budget recommendation provides the following: resources to educate 3,165 students, mental health, nutrition, and medical care to allow students to access instruction, specialized services required for all students to meet their potential, diverse opportunities for students to engage in activities outside of their curricular pursuits, and transportation to and from school. There are many internal and external factors that drive the budget each year. Internally, student enrollment, contractual increases such as salaries, vendor contracts, special education, and medical benefits all play a part. Student enrollment has rebounded to be consistent with the few years prior to the pandemic, and the district has responsibly negotiated contracts for teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals and clerical, and nurses this past year. In addition to board members taking part in these contractual negotiations, a representative from the Board of Finance was also took part in the process for certified staff. In a few weeks, we will actually begin negotiations for the custodial contract. As always, we continue to review vendor contracts, especially around student services, to find potential savings. Externally, the state of the state and federal education reserve, and state and federal mandates always come into play. Overall, the state has been rather quiet in regards to mandates. We are very grateful for the additional federal funding that has been provided to the district. Howard has been diligent in keeping the application updated, as well as ensuring that we are adhering to the goals that were established for the utilization of these funds. This slide reflects North Haven's per-pupil expenditure in relation to our district reference group. North Haven currently ranks 15 out of 24 in DIRG D districts. This is 3 places lower as compared to the 18-19 rankings. However, North Haven continues to remain in the middle of the pack. So the average per-pupil expenditure for DIRG D is $19,132. North Haven spends $396 less per student per year than this average. And for comparison purposes, North Haven is $2,997 from the lowest district in our DIRG and $5,539 from the top spending district. So the 21-22 approved budget for the Board of Education was $58,470,730. The Board of Education proposed budget for the 22-23 school year is $60,166,330. This requested increase for the 22-23 school year is $1,695,600. This reflects a 2.9% increase. Let me just go back one here. This increase will meet our contractual obligations, healthcare benefits, and increases in facilities and educational equipment and software. Included in this increase is an effort to move 3 positions into the general operating budget. These positions were established this school year through the utilization of ESSER 3 funds. The goal from the onset was to move these positions into the operating budget so that they are sustainable for future years. We are able to move these positions in this upcoming budget while still keeping to a 2.9% increase. We believe that it's imperative to keep these positions in place as they directly and positively impact students, as well as allow us to meet the needs of all types of learners within our district. This graphic depicts the overview of the budget with the largest pieces dedicated to salaries, benefits, and transportation. and these areas equate to around 83% of the total budget request. This chart reflects the discretionary versus non-discretionary spending from year to year. As you can see, over the past 4 years, non-discretionary spending hovers around 96% of the total budget. So since the presentation to the Board of Finance back in February, the 22-23 budget has been impacted by a few unplanned changes. There have been some add-backs to the budget, which include employees who have returned after leave who will not receive a step increase per their contract, as well as savings from known retirements with replacements who have already been selected. Now, there are also some shortfalls that the 2.9% increase will need to account for. At this time, these shortfalls will not directly impact students. While creating the budget, $125,000 less than our actuary recommended was budgeted for medical expenses. The goal was to remain under 3% for an overall increase, and budgeting this amount for medical expenses continues to keep the district in solid standing with our medical reserve account. Another unexpected shortfall was the cost of replacing 2 retired math teachers. These 2 positions were hired at a higher step than the 2 teachers who retired. Just to provide some context, hiring a new staff member at a higher salary is not a common practice. However, there is currently a shortage in qualified and certified math candidates, so the best candidates were teachers who were higher on the salary scale. Certified staff have also earned degree changes, which will increase their salary. These increases cannot be planned for, as we do not know when teachers will complete their courses. And when the 22-23 budget was created, fuel was at $2.85 per gallon. Proactively, we budgeted $3.35 per gallon within the budget. But as we all know too well, the cost of fuel is currently about $1 higher than we originally projected. This could potentially add an additional $95,000 to the account for next year. In total, the district will need to account for approximately $188,000. As I stated earlier, we are going to make every effort to account for these shortfalls without impacting students. However, any additional reductions will draw us dangerously close to affecting the services the district provides to students. So as I stated earlier in the presentation, 3 new positions are included in this recommendation, in addition to the proposal of 2 new athletic teams at the high school. These new positions are currently in place within the district and are being funded through ESSER 3 funds, not the operating budget. It is imperative that these positions remain as they directly impact student achievement. And while keeping to this 2.9% increase, we are able to move these 3 positions over to the operating budget next fiscal year. A school counselor at North Haven High School was created to allow for additional mental health support and college and career planning. It also lessens the caseloads of students for each counselor. A kindergarten through 5th grade SRBI coordinator, SRBI stands for Scientifically Research-Based Interventions. It was also added this year, and its purpose is to unify and improve the intervention service we provide across elementary schools. And an English learner teacher, which allows the district to meet the increased enrollment of students who receive English language services. And as you can see, the number of students in this area has increased significantly over the past 4 years. And for approximately $40,000, the girls rugby team and wrestling team was added to this year's proposal. Of that $40,000, $8,500 of it represents a one-time cost for the wrestling team to purchase equipment, such as the big mats that they wrestle on. So in closing, I just want to say thank you to the Board of Education, the Board of Finance, and the North Haven community. North Haven is known for its commitment to education and the community support of its annual operating budget. I really look forward to an extraordinary 22-23 school year as we continue to deliver an exceptional education to the children and families of North Haven. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stark. So at this time, we'd like to open it up for questions and comments. As I noted before, if you'd like to come forward, we have 2 microphones here. Please come forward and state your name and your address. And we'll start now. Raise your hand, Mrs. Blamey.
Good evening. Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. I do not support this budget for many reasons, even though it has a no tax increase. I was very happy to hear the first selectman's dedication to a no mill rate increase. I share his concerns about citizens in our town who are struggling right now. Families getting by week to week with out-of-control food costs, fuel costs, gas prices. It's very difficult. So I was happy to hear his determination to have a no mill rate increase. But I was a little confused at the March 15th Board of Finance meeting. So before I go into my discussion of the budget, I have a question for Board of Finance Chairman Monaco, because at that March 15th Board of Finance meeting, the board did approve this budget that's presented here to you guys tonight with no mill rate increase. However, there was much discussion at that meeting, most of it from the chairman, about the need for a tax increase this year, and he talked quite a bit about the mill rate going up 0.47, which is almost half a mil. So my question for the chairman of the Board of Finance is, will the budget that is presented to the voters at the May 17th referendum have a mill rate increase, yes or no?
In case you didn't hear, Mr. Monaco noted in response to Mrs. Blamey's question that there will be no mill rate increase.
Okay, so all of that discussion at the Board of Finance meeting is moot now. That there was quite a bit of discussion about a mill rate increase for this year at the Board of Finance meeting. So you're saying now that that's moot, and so we can go forward with a no mill rate increase. Is that correct? Thank you. Okay. Before I offer my specific opinions on this budget, I do have another question for the Board of Finance Chairman, Mr. Monaco. At the March Board of Finance meeting, a Democratic member, Nancy Barrett, gave a long list of proposed spending cuts on a variety of line items, and I think she had a couple of line item increases. It was obvious she worked very hard on this list, an effort that Mr. Frieda said that he appreciated. And while Mrs. Barrett was going through this long list, some of the items that she suggested in reductions were in the area of $1,000 to $5,000. And during her presentation of her list, you, Mr. Chairman, rudely interrupted her and told her not to bother with such small cuts of $5,000 or less. And I have here last year's Republican declination sheet dated March 17th of 2021. This is the sheet that the Republicans presented for their line item reductions. It has 29 total changes, 16 of which were $5,000 or less reductions, 7 of which were only $1,000 or $2,000. So my question to the chairman of the Board of Finance is, why was it improper? Why did you not want to be bothered by Mrs. Barrett's small proposed cuts when it was perfectly okay for the Republican members last year to have many items 5,000 or less. Your interruption of Mrs. Barrett was rude, condescending, sexist, and obviously politically motivated. Why can the Republicans suggest small cuts, but not a well-meaning, hard-working Democratic member?
Ms. Boehme, I take exception to what you're saying.
Okay, I took
She
exception.
was given an opportunity to request her changes. When she was finished requesting it, she made it in the form of a motion, it was voted on, and it failed. That's what discussion's for. My point about not dealing with the $1,000 and $2,000 items in this particular budget had more to do with the fact that this budget was done before inflation and fuel prices were hitting where they are. And added to that, some of her reductions, just as you did a few years back with a list of reductions with no justification behind them, did not make sense. OPEB is something that we've been trying to fund, and reducing it for the sake of reducing it made no sense to other board members. As far as the no tax increase, I support this administration, and I supported the expense side of this budget completely. Mr. Friedman, I had a difference, excuse me, a difference on how it was to be funded. I wanted to increase taxes slightly. I mentioned it to board members. We discussed it. It did not move forward on that. And what's been presented now is the initial budget that Mr. Frieda presented with a no tax increase.
Again, my question is, you told Mrs. Barrett not to bother with 5,000 or less.
I don't know if I
line
used that
items.
exact wording.
Those were your
but-
exact words. And so I would like to know, why is it okay for Republicans to propose 5,000 or less line items?
Maybe I should repeat what I just said again.
Okay.
In this
I'm
year's
not talking
budget,
about the
there was
merits.
no...
I'm not talking about the merits of her proposals. You simply dismissed them because of their size. Okay?
Let's try again.
That is what I had a
Let's
problem
try
with.
again. This budget was developed before inflation, before the inflation numbers that we're seeing. Reducing small line items was actually going to affect the probability of having a deficit next year. Even little line items, some of them, maybe it was $1,000, maybe there was $2,000 for that line item. Maybe that item is going to cost us $2,500 this year because of inflation.
Well, okay.
So if you don't understand that there's a difference between year to year, I don't know what else I can tell you about it.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
I think that telling someone not to bother with small reductions, it was obviously a politically motivated statement because the Republicans did it the prior year. Thankfully, Mr. Frieda was very appreciative and even asked Mrs. Barrett if she could please send him a copy of her proposed list. And another Republican member, Ms. Fisicchio, stated that perhaps at the next meeting they could take a look at some of her proposals. So at least some of the Republicans on the Board of Finance were at least willing to listen, and that's all that I was asking, was to listen, not to be just shut off right away. Oh, don't bother with those small ones. But some of the Republicans were actually willing to listen and consider. And so I appreciate Ms. Fisicchio and Mr. Frieda at least entertaining the thought of thinking about and considering her list. Now, let me talk about some of the issues that I have with this budget. First, there are a lot of new positions, and we do have in this budget, if you look at page 7 and 8 of the book that you were provided, it has the income budget, and you'll see, and Mr. Frieda referenced, we're getting $1.6 million in ARPA money that we're using as a revenue source this year. We won't have that next year, and I think that it's a little dangerous. 13 new positions is an awful lot of new positions, and I think it's a little dangerous to spend so freely when you have short-term sources of revenue. There was an article about this in a recent local paper, and Mr. Frieda acknowledged that yes, after the federal dollars cease, that the taxpayers will be shouldering the burden of maintaining those positions. One of the new positions is a supernumerary. Now, if you look on page 26 of the town budget, it is listed as an SRO, which is incorrect. SRO stands for School Resource Officer, which is a police officer, a regular union police officer, full-time with benefits. The supernumerary program, which started in June of 2018, a program I fully supported, is retired police officers that do not get benefits, and it was originally designed for one each in the elementary school and then one in the middle school. We now have one in the high school, and the police chief, Glenn, has asked for another supernumerary, and he wants to remove the SRO, the regular, if you will, police officer that we've had for many years. I have a problem with that. As I said, I supported the supernumerary program on June 25th, 2018, when we had a town meeting here in this room. Hundreds of people were here to pass that ordinance and to fund that program. The problem I have is it was very clear at that meeting that then Police Chief Tom McLaughlin stated that the supernumeraries, these retired police officers there to protect our kids for security only, would not have any disciplinary authority. In fact, at that town meeting, an amendment was passed where 4 provisions that I had objected to at a Board of Selectmen meeting were actually removed from the ordinance so that the disciplinary authority of the supernumeraries were removed. So I have a problem with the officer who would have disciplinary authority and arresting authority to be not in the high school anymore. Do we have a town attorney here? Okay, because I also had a concern because I was in preparation for my comments about the request for the additional supernumerary. I reviewed the supernumerary ordinance and the town meeting, and at that, so this is really a legal question, but at that town meeting, when we voted to approve the supernumerary program, the motion that was made, the resolution that was made and passed, it was item 5 on the agenda, was to establish the supernumerary program and to fund it at an initial $220,000 to be established by an ordinance of the ordinances of the town of North Haven to protect the health, safety, and welfare of students enrolled at the elementary schools and middle school in the town of North Haven. And that resolution was seconded and passed. So my legal question is, and again, I supported this program 100%, but this is a procedural question. Are we in violation of our ordinance because we have a supernumerary at the high school when the resolution only called for them to be at the elementary schools and middle schools?
Are you directing your question to the non-present attorney?
Well, perhaps we could have a town attorney at the budget town meeting on the 9th, and I can ask that question there, because it's just something that I noticed. So I have a problem with the extra supernumerary, and maybe a problem with the supernumeraries at the high school. We might have to change our ordinance. I don't know. But I really think that we need to keep a police officer at the high school for security. And the Police Chief Glenn also requested at his budget workshop, in addition to a new supernumerary, he requested 3 new police officers. In this current fiscal year, we have 3 new officers. It's my understanding they had trouble finding officers, as many municipalities are having trouble finding qualified officers, but I believe we do now have the 3rd one hired. But last year when these 3 were requested, I suggested a phase-in. We did a phase-in of 8 new firefighters, 2 at a time over 4 years. I thought that phasing in 2 this current year and then 2 was a better idea than 3 all at once to ease the tax burden on the property, on our taxpayers. But last year when the 3 were requested and I made that suggestion of phase-in, there was no indication that they would be looking for 3 more this year. And so I think 6 in just 2 fiscal years is a little high. So I would reduce that to just 1 new firefighter, and I would suggest that he be hired at the beginning of the fiscal year. Usually when we hire new police or new fire, we do it mid-fiscal year. Isn't that correct? That's what we have been doing. But I would suggest that we just hire 1, so the 3 this year plus 1 would be 4, and then I would certainly very seriously consider 2 more as a final phase in next year, hopefully when Mr. Frieda's promised economic development, which he said tonight was a fact, that there would be more economic development next year. I think that a phase-in is a better idea. As far as, and you know, there's one more thing I want to say about the police. Chief Glenn cited an increase in crime as justification for 3 new officers. Now, we haven't, the 3 that we hired this year just started in January. So we really haven't had a chance to determine if these 3 are helping with the crime rate. But I agree with him that crime is a big problem here. We were all mortified a few weeks ago when a 90-year-old resident, a woman, was knocked to the ground at Target, I believe it was, and her purse was stolen. So I have a suggestion for Mr. Frieda. I have great respect for your tireless economic development efforts, sir. And what my suggestion is while you're out there pounding the pavement for economic development, I would suggest that you work on the major retailers in town and see if they can enhance their own parking lot security. They have plenty of security in their buildings to protect against shoplifting, but I don't see much of their security out in the parking lots to protect us. They're making millions of dollars. I really think that we need a little bit of help from the retailers who are in town making millions of dollars and provide us with some parking lot security. As far as the 2 additional firefighters, this is again a phase-in. The fire chief stated that he wants 2 this year and then 2 more next year. And one of the things that you really have to understand about assessing fire department staffing is that they have 4 shifts. They work for 24 hours, then they're off for 3 days, and it goes like that. There's 4 shifts, and we currently have budgeted 10 firefighters per shift. So the 2 this year, the 2 for this budget we're considering tonight, plus 2 the following year, would bring it up to 11 per shift. And the reasoning is that it would help save contract replacement. What that means is when someone is out on a shift for either illness, he's sick, vacation, personal time, that spot in the shift has to be maintained. We have to have 10 working at all times. And that person that's the contractual replacement. It gets confused with overtime all the time, but they're really 2 different things. And that contractual replacement is at time and a half. And last year, it broke the $1 million mark for the first time at $1,167,000. And it's on track this year to crack another $1 million for sure. My problem is we haven't yet fully realized the financial and operational consequences of the 8-man phase-in. All of last year, we only had 2 of the 4 shifts at 10 men per shift. The third one, it only started in January, And the fourth shift, although budgeted, is not at 10 yet. So we don't even have any data of what it's like from the phase-in of the initial 8. And I think that to claim that hiring 4 more, and the pretext for this is that it will save on contractual obligations, because they're willing to have an 11-man shift, but if one guy is out, it won't be replaced. They'll operate at 10. But keep in mind, you're still paying for 11 even if he's out. He's getting paid either sick pay, vacation pay. So I don't buy that it would save $360,000. The chief came to that conclusion. He estimated, based on looking at when last year, when we didn't have 4 shifts at 10 men, but he looked at last year, he's estimating $90,000 savings per shift. There's 4 shifts, that's $360,000. The problem is, what does it cost to hire 4 firefighters to save that alleged $360,000? Well, it costs about $480,000. Everyone agrees on the Board of Finance, and I spoke with the chief at a fire commission meeting recently, that a firefighter costs for base salary plus benefits $120,000. So that's 4 times that is $480,000. So you're paying $480,000 to save maybe $360,000, and I doubt it'll save that. But and don't forget that cost is just salary and benefits. It doesn't include many other line items are affected in our budget with new staff. The Social Security line item for firefighters, there's training and equipment, which I fully support. They need 2 sets of equipment, 2 sets of everything, which they need, and I fully support that. But there's a lot more to it than just salary and benefits, that $120,000 per year. I just think we need to wait. At the very least, we need to wait and see what the full realization of the initial phase-in of 8 is before we start a new phase-in. The other problem I have with the fire department increase is that there will be no additional apparatus utilized. And the chief confirmed this to me when I was at the March Fire Commission meeting. When you have just 1 more firefighter per shift, you can't activate another apparatus. Right now, with 10 men, we have 2 engines, 1 at headquarters, 1 at Montaouise, a ladder truck at headquarters, and a rescue unit. And there's 10 men on those 4 apparatus. With 1 more guy added, there's no additional apparatus. We've been hearing a lot about an increase in calls. I agree with Mr. Frieda. Public safety is important, but these 4 new firefighters hired for the purpose of maybe saving money on the contractual line will not do anything to increase apparatus going to a 911 call. So that's kind of a secondary reason. I am, at this time, against the 2 firefighters. I do support the town engineer. I think that's important. And I support the sanitation collector and the laborer for streets and roads. And I also support the community services position and the 2 new positions in the finance office, the controller, CPA, and the director of administration and purchasing, I believe, is the title of that second position. So I do support those. I just feel that it's a little dangerous when the federal money is flowing. That's only the short term to have all these new hires at once. I think it just puts too much of a burden on the taxpayers, and I think we have to wait for a little bit more of our economic development to catch up before we go with the full 13 new positions. As far as the Board of Ed,
Mrs. Blaney, may I ask a quick question? You've had the floor for 25 minutes. If you have a lot more, it might be fair to let others speak, and then you could come back.
Five more minutes and I'll be done, not even.
5 more minutes.
Yep, okay. Regarding the Board of Ed, I would suggest a very modest cut in their increase of about $200,000. That would still give them a $1.5 million increase. So I'm not decreasing their budget. I'm proposing a slight decrease in their increase. And the reason why I'm doing this is the Board of Finance has a long history of making significant cuts in Board of Ed requests. 5 years ago, they cut the request by 40%. 4 years ago, they cut the request by 28%. The past 2 years, they gave them every dollar they wanted, and in both of those years, they had significant surpluses. Enrollment is down. It's at 3,044. 10 years ago, it was at 3,600, and it's about 70 less than it was last year, according to our CAFRA report that was issued recently. So I think in these tough times, every department has to contribute, and I think a $200,000 cut in the Board of Ed is still supportive of education, which is very important, but everyone has to chip in. As far as capital, I do approve of all 11 items that were listed. However, I think 3 of them should not be paid with ARPA funds. I think that you should not use a temporary funding source, which is what ARPA is, to fund ongoing expenses. That is a bad budgeting practice. So the 3 police cruisers, the siren package, and the $300,000 fire engine lease should be put back into our budget and supported by the budget. I don't think it's a good idea. Those are things that we're going to have every year. All of the other items I fully support, including all of the fire department equipment. You see, I'm not always against the fire department. I have supported many, many, many of their requests for equipment and apparatus. And so in summary, I just urge the Board of Finance to work hard at their April 20th meeting to change this budget. We cannot have all of these new positions at once. It is an unprecedented number. We need to cut that number back. We need to make a modest cut in the Board of Ed. We need to add a few capital items back into the budget. And I hope the Board of Finance will seriously consider some of Mrs. Barrett's long list of proposals, even the little ones. And if you do all of these things, you can keep the budget at a no tax increase, and dare I say, perhaps even a decrease. Thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to make a comment or a question? If so, please raise your hand. I'm having a hard time with the light. Yes, Mrs. Barrett?
It's a tough act to follow, but I promise I won't take quite as long. Good evening, and I'm Nancy Barrett, and I live at 1 Crestview Drive, and I'm an elected member of the North Haven Board of Finance. As was mentioned earlier, there was a March Board of Finance meeting that went on for well over 4 hours, and during that meeting, I voted against the proposed spending increase of $4.2 million in the budget, in the proposed budget, and no mill rate increase. There was significant discussion about perhaps reducing the amount of transfer from our general fund as a stimulus to this proposed budget, and in so doing, there was also significant discussion about increasing the tax rate or the mill rate for the next fiscal year, but it was never proposed as a motion, so it was never voted on at that particular meeting. So before I get into the budget details, I'd just like to say that I have tried for the past 3 pandemic budget development cycles to substantially reduce the mill rate. 2 years ago, suggestions from Democrats on the Board of Finance helped to reduce it by 0.46 mills, but of course it was a reval year, so the impact of that reduction was varied across the town. Last spring, the tax rate for the current fiscal year was reduced by just 1/100th of a mil, so I'm going to call that no change. In fiscal year 2022-23, the proposed mill rate has only been discussed as having either no change, that's what Mr. Frieda presented, or an increase. But folks, there is a third option, and that is to reduce it. At the March Board of Finance meeting, and again this evening, Mr. Frieda said, you know, the rating agencies really like tax increases. You know who doesn't like tax increases? Taxpayers. And while I understand the benefits of a AAA bond rating in terms of access to low-interest debt refinancing or new debt issuance, those features will not benefit our working-class community right now when people are still hurting. You can't use the AAA bond rating to put food on the table, pay your mortgage or rent, put gas in your car or oil in your furnace, or buy prescription medications. The circumstances, I believe, are well poised right now for reduction in the North Haven mill rate. The economic conditions that were mentioned, 7% inflation, combined with increased vehicle taxes and the lagging effects of COVID on employment rates, depressed economic development, and dependence on our food banks, justifies the reduction of the mill rate in North Haven. As we all know, there are two ways to reduce the mill rate. One is to find additional sources of revenue, and the second is to cut expenses. At this particular point in time, we have the luxury of access to both federal money and the ability to trim some budget fat. By way of background, each year, the very first version of the town's budget is what I would call fully loaded, and what our dearly departed Finance Director Ed Swinkowski used to say contained the Christmas wish lists of expenditures from each department head. The 2022-2023 wish lists summed up to $119.8 million, which was an $8 million increase over the current fiscal year budget of $111.8 million. The next step was that Mr. Frieda and the Republican Board of Finance members, each year they typically assemble a list of budget changes, mostly reductions, which is why it's referred to as the declination list. For 2022-23 proposed budget, Mr. Frieda's declination list was remarkably short, less than just one page. But it managed to cut the budget down to $116 million. Now that's still a $4.2 million increase. And it's a 5.9% increase on the town side and 2.9% increase on the Board of Ed side. Now, there are very few parts to this declination list. The first that I needed to point out is that there are only 3 town budget operational changes that sum up to a total of $576,000. And one of them was the result of just changing the title of a new position. In addition, there was $1.1 million in capital reductions by the use of the ARPA funds, as Mr. Frieda mentioned. We also are going to use a MRSA waiver to pay for one capital item, and there were 2 cuts to public works requests. And as was mentioned, there was no change in the Board of Education budget. So I poured through the 2022-23 budget and examined budgeted versus actual spending for the past 3 years. Based upon historical data, I proposed 20 reductions for a total of $600,000 and 2 increases for a total of $40,000 that spanned across 15 departments for a net total of about 5 budget increase. And I'm very hopeful that my fellow board members who are receptive to my proposals will take them into consideration and make the additional cuts. But in order for expenditure decreases to even be entertained, Mr. Frieda needs to hear from the community that spending cuts and tax reduction are the priority right now. Mr. Frieda is very quick to point out that we must have some wiggle room built into the budget so that underexpended line items can compensate for the overexpenditures at the end of the year through the transfer process. But I believe that this can be addressed by two ways: by better budget forecasting, meaning more accurate, and department managers paying closer attention to the monthly budget reports. To be clear, I can be supportive of departments, appreciate the services that they provide to the community, and still oppose specific line item change requests. It is practical. It is not personal. I am motivated by serving the best interests of the people of North Haven that elected me. In my opinion, however, this is not the time to add 13 new positions to the town budget. Those costs will only grow each and every year, both in salaries and benefits. As Ms. Boehme mentioned, I don't think that it's an appropriate use of ARPA funds to pay for routine annual town capital expenditures. Now, I am a founding member of the Team for Education, but despite that, I cannot support adding 3 new positions to the BOE budget when only one is a teacher, and as was mentioned, a teacher of English as a second language. And although there are 144 students, that still is a very small fraction of 3,000 students. I cannot continue to grow the BOE budget after years of significant surpluses. Last year, more than $1 million. And lastly, I find it very difficult to support paying 17 BOE administrators $2.5 million. I believe that we have to demand some accountability for 17 six-figure salaries, and these are discretionary, by the way. And like Mike Frieda, I'm also an advocate of public safety. However, I do not support this budget's proposal for increasing the police force by 3 police officers and firefighters by an additional 2 firefighters, because I do not believe that either one of those proposals will result in increased public safety service. We have already hired 8 firefighters and 3 patrolmen. And as a result of hiring those 8 firefighters, have we activated 1 ambulance across the 4 shifts? We have not. And if we hire 4 more, will we activate another ambulance? No, we will not be able to. So we will have to hire 16 firefighters in order to activate 1 ambulance service in this town, where the vast majority of our calls are medical. And likewise, in terms of the patrolmen, we have hired 3 patrolmen already. Now, it's only been a half year, but has the crime rate decreased? Time will tell. But I believe that there are some crimes that will happen independent of police staffing. We cannot have police officers everywhere all the time. So we can't hold them accountable if we don't lock our cars, if we leave our valuables out. So I strongly recommend that everyone please think about that before you go to bed at night. Please lock your doors, and also in the parking lots, be aware of your surroundings. Last year, I suggested to the police chief that perhaps he could be working with the security for all of the large stores in our town, because it really shouldn't be up to the taxpayers of North Haven to provide security for these multi-million-dollar national chains like Home Depot and Target and Stop and Shop. And lastly, I don't think that this is the time to overtax the good people of North Haven in order to compensate for inconsistent departmental financial management, or to appease the First Selectman's laser focus on the AAA bond rating. But folks, as long as the priority is on maximizing the general fund balance and increasing the mill rate and grasping that elusive brass ring of the AAA bond rating, then my suggestions for reduced spending and tax rate decreases will be rejected. You, the town meeting, must vocalize your opinions and answer the following questions. First, should the day-to-day needs of the North Haven voting public be a higher priority than the whimsical demands of the bonding rating agencies? Second, should we continue to spend money on wants, such as improved appearances of athletic fields, rather than the actual needs of our community, and then wind up like West Haven? And for those who don't know, the town of West Haven, their finances have been taken over by a state agency. And lastly, we have to ask ourselves, are the people of North Haven willing to pay more money for the same services, or in some cases, even less? So you have to decide for yourselves. Thank you very much for your time, and have a good night.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to? Yes, Mr. Katz?
My name is Sherman Katz, 40 Sherwood Drive. I've lived in North Haven for 54 years, and I attended many meetings over the years, and I'm starting to attend again. The last Board of Finance meeting, well, first I want to bring up a point. There was a question about a firefighter returning to work after military service, which is a federal law, and I understand that. If I may have misunderstood, if I didn't, if we have one returning, why are we hiring 2 new ones? Why not just one? You're going to still get his 2 a year. I am an unaffiliated voter. I am neither Republican nor Democrat. I vote for the person, and I've seen some things going on with the Board of Finance over the past 2 or 3 years. Very disappointed. They're rubber stamping the request of the various departments. They've either lost or don't care to delve into the actual nitty-gritty of why these requests are there. Previous years, they would investigate it. They sent 2 members of the board to work with the fire department on needs. So at that meeting, Mr. Monaco was in favor of a 0.47 mil increase. Matter of fact, he was pushing a 0.47 mil increase. One of the statements he made, and I'm not going to quote, it's not word for word, the people can afford it. Well, remember, that's not just on your house, that's on your cars. In businesses, it's on their shelving. So it's not just the residents that get hit, it's the businesses that get hit. We just lost the business because the rent was too high, according to what the newspaper said. That was Discount Shoe Warehouse. Why was the rent too high? Was it because of the taxes or property values? I don't know, but we could lose businesses as easily as get businesses. I think it's time for us to look at this budget and find another way to reduce it even further. Since you were able to go to eliminate that 0.47 mil increase, I suspect you could find a way to reduce it another 0.47. Residents need it. You have 30% or thereabouts of the residents of North Haven are seniors. Many of them are living on Social Security and a few dollars that they saved over the years. Social Security for these people can range anywhere from $1,000 a month to $2,800 a month. Try living on $1,000 a month. Many of you people make that in 2 days. the people that built this town, we had dirt roads back in those days. And these are the people that supported education, supported the police, the fire, and now you need to help them out. Any raise in taxes hurts. You know, Mike, you know people that have to choose between food and medication because they just can't afford the extra money. So I'm asking you to take this back, look at it, ask the department heads if they can skin back somewhere. They've had surpluses every year. It's nice to stand up and say we have a surplus. There's a fellow that used to speak at every meeting when he lived in North Haven, Michael Mealy. And he said a surplus is not a surplus, it's overtaxation. So thank you very much. I am against this budget. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Would anyone else like to speak? Comments or questions? Yes, ma'am. I can't tell who you are because of your mask, but I think you're Mrs. Caldwell.
Jenny Caldwell, 69 Kimberly Circle. I think my biggest comments are, as the Board of Finance is going to go back and relook at this budget, I 100% support the increase in the fire department. I know that the fire chief has been providing the Board of Finance with information that is looks at the finances behind the contractual replacement line item. But I also want to say that for me, when I'm looking at my taxes, nobody wants to have taxes if they can help it. You want the lowest tax level you can. But it's more about what you're willing to put your tax money towards. And to me, the absolute baseline thing we should be looking at is public safety. And when it comes to the fire department, response time is extremely important. And the number of volunteers have been reduced over reducing over time, and the fire department has managed for a very long time with reducing numbers. And I think that as our fire chief is telling us that this is an area that we need to be looking at is our fire department staffing. That is certainly, I think, what we should be doing, because if you are sitting trapped in a car on the highway, you have a medical emergency in your home, this happened to me, a child locked in a hot car and you need emergency services, or your house is on fire, you want the fire department there within minutes, not 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's the difference between life and death. So I think that is, for me, an absolute baseline. If we don't add the extra fire personnel, it is not a budget I would support. So when you're talking about want versus needs, if you're looking for feedback as one resident in North Haven, public safety is the #1 priority. There are certainly things in the budget that I think that are discretionary and could be reduced, but at this point, for me, the public safety is the #1 issue that I think we should be ensuring that we fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask a question or make any comments? Yes, Mr. Llanos.
Jim Llanos, 59 Juniper Drive, North Haven. Short and sweet. I, along with my fellow Board of Finance members, worked diligently with integrity on this budget. We worked hard, many workshops, late into the evenings, Saturdays, to give you the best budget that you could possibly receive for the upcoming year. Zero tax increase. Can't ask for anything more than that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to speak or ask a question or make a comment? No one else? Going once? Going twice? Ms. Boehme? I can't hear you, I'm sorry. No No, ma'am. No one else raised their hand. No one else? Okay.
I have one question for Superintendent Stirk. You gave us some statistics about the DIRG and where North Haven places in the DIRG, and you stated that if you look at the average, I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, the average cost per pupil in the DIRG, we're about $350 below average. Per student, yeah, per pupil. That's what that's based on. Mr. Frieda rightly often points out when he has his beautiful pie charts that the Board of Ed budget, the Board of Ed debt on the middle school and the high school, which is a significant part of our overall debt, is all on the town side. Therefore, it's not in the Board of Ed budget. So these other DIRGs that have higher per pupil expenditures than we have here in North Haven, do you know if they have their debt on the Board of Ed, in their Board of Ed budget, which would increase? Do you get my question?
Just for those viewers at home, Mr. Stirk's response was that he does not know the response, but he will look into it.
Okay, perhaps you could get me some information when you complete that. That's always been a concern, because when Mr. Frieda points that out, I think it's very significant that dollar for dollar, yes, it's 52% Board of Ed, 48%, but when you take in the debt, it changes it. And if other towns don't do that, it would affect where we sit in that DIRG list. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Boehme. Would anyone else like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Quick question for either Mr. Frieda or for the fire chief. Mr. Frieda, you listed on your sheet, on your slide, that part of the reason for the proposed increase in fire staffing was to add 2 firefighters this year and potentially 2 the following year in order to improve response time. So given the fact that it's already been pointed out, going from 10 to 11 firefighters would not result in the activation of an additional vehicle, I'm just wondering what's the basis for that particular claim? Fire Chief, would you like to answer it? Thank you.
Are you looking for, okay.
Good evening, and thank you for the question. My name is Paul Januszewski. I'm the fire chief in North Haven. I'm also a town resident. Regarding the question and the presentation, which referenced response times, I think what the presentation is aiming at is response times overall of personnel on scene. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is that the volunteers in town are doing the best they can, but they're just not performing at the numbers they once did. This department was based on a volunteer response of 150 personnel when this career department was put together in 1967, 1974. We're down to 28 volunteers right now, ladies and gentlemen. 28 from 150. These volunteers were not ancillary support. These volunteers were not individuals that we sent if the career staff wasn't available. These volunteers were sent out on calls at the same exact time as the career staff, with the one exception being EMS calls. So when we talk about response times, we're talking about adding that one additional firefighter per shift, that if there is 11 firefighters on duty, as we've indicated, is going to take care of that response time in terms of providing more firefighters on scene. One thing we can't get away from here is national stats and national data. The National Consensus Standard, NFPA 1710, states 15 to 17 firefighters on scene within the first 8 minutes for a single family residence with no basement. If I only am arriving with 10, I'm a far cry from that 15 to 17. So that's why we're impacting response times. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Did you have any follow-up, Mrs. Barrett?
My question is related to response time of 10 versus 11. So if you have 4 people on an engine versus 3, how does that make you get to a fire any faster? Please.
So again, it's response time of personnel. Don't think about it in terms of response time of apparatus. Correct. 4 individuals on an engine does not necessarily impact how fast it travels, nor does 3. It's a matter of response time of personnel. So thinking about it in terms of personnel and not apparatus. And so 4 individuals on an apparatus or 3 on a ladder truck, the fire commission has not yet decided where that 11th firefighter would serve, which is why I've been hesitant to answer, is where they would be detailed to, either the engine or the ladder. And again, going back to those same standards, that NFPA 1710, those national standards that have been tried, tested, and proved over and over again, require 4 on an engine and 4 on a ladder truck. So we're still not meeting the standards.
Thank you very much, Chief. Anyone else have any questions or comments? I don't see any hands raised. So therefore, I'm going to end the public hearing, but before I do so, I will remind you that we will have the town budget meeting on May 9th here at the high school, at the high school at 7 p.m. Seeing no hands and nothing further to present, I do end this public hearing for the Towns and Board of Ed's budget. Thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you for everyone's participation. Have a lovely evening.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the Town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.